Hey guys, here for week 2 commentary. I've been battling a sinus infection, fever, the works for about 12-14 days, so I'm a little behind. But just wanted to go over the iced tea discussion where you had to talk about what you see and then describe what you think it's about. So I was writing notes while I was reading over the discussion comments. I'm going to post these notes on the screen and just kind of unpack what I've written. So first thing is what we see is Ice-T sitting in there. He's got his contemporary clothes on. He's obviously sitting in an older setting, more traditional setting. Could be religious, could be royal. A lot of you pointed out the patterns, the colors. You pointed out that he's holding a staff. So all of you, even though if you weren't sure who he was, you made the connection that it could be a king, that this person was important. So then with what you think it's about, it got really interesting. I'm just going to kind of read through this, but some people wrote the expression, it's emotionless. I wanted to discuss that too, that this original painting, which Jessica Hoffman, some other people may have, but I saw hers first. She posted the original painting that is referencing Jean Augustus Domingo Ing's original painting of Napoleon. Napoleon was a king and a very cocky person at that. But for the emotionless expression, back in the day before cameras, when people were posing for portraits, it would take, the paintings would take so long that the artist would not have people smile. Because if you're sitting there smiling for an hour to 2-3 hours, your face started to hurt. So when you see portraits of families, people, whoever, they're very stoic because of that reason. So a lot of you commented on the influence of Ice-T, the influence of a king. And I proposed a question is influence power, money, and fame? Does influence always have to mean something grander? So could someone be, I think, and I just was proposing this question for my own curiosity, as far as influence coming from someone who's not as highlighted as a celebrity or as a king or as, whatever. I think back, obviously, in Napoleon times, you couldn't have influence without those things. But now, in our culture today, you can be an influential person. There's YouTubers who they're not that they're nobodies, but in relation to categorizing them, within a social construct, they're not people that have powerful positions or money necessarily, but you can have influence in a different way now. It's interesting, some of you also wrote that he looked angry. So I wrote, in order to demand respect, there's certain demeanor we expect. So in order to be, if someone's demanding that, do they have to be strict or stern or serious? Personally, I think you can feel it when people are making a stance. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're talking aggressive or that they're being aggressive, but demanding respect has a certain demeanor. So I thought it was really, really fascinating. For those of you who knew Ice-T, your comments compared to the people who did not know who he was. I think that it changed. For those of you who do know who he is, the comments were very much about the world of hip-hop, his influence as a rapper, being one of the original rappers, but then as opposed to a person who didn't know who he was. I'm going to jump down to my comments about Law and Order. Jana wrote down that he was in Law and Order. So some of you may have even recognized him as that as far as his acting goes. But I think that the fact that you have recognition from something changes the way you read something. So for those of you who have never seen this man before in your entire life, you were looking at it more of the context clues. You were looking at his clothing and trying to figure out, why is he dressed this way and what does that mean? As opposed to, for those of you who knew what he does, who know who he is and what he does, you're like, oh, that's Ice-T, that's how he dresses. So I just think that that's interesting how if you think about things, your recognition of something changes your mindset of it. Let's say Ronald McDonald was in this image. All of you, almost every single one of us would know who that is. But if a 6-year-old who's never seen Ronald McDonald saw it, he would think it was a clown. So again, the recognition changes the way we read something. Remember that with your students. That's important. We've talked about this before, that the story, our relativity changes our learning experiences. So, that's good to have a knowledge of what your students do know, so that you can better enhance their learning experience. Oh, okay, I like this one too. Lauren was talking about, hard work versus being born into that position. And she spoke about the rise above. Right now in our culture, there's certain buzzwords, rise up, resist, to rise. Those are not new words or new ideas, but they're definitely, in terms of the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter, in terms of the different types of brutality and all that stuff, the word rise is becoming a empowering word. So I'm curious too, Napoleon, kings and people of importance back then were born into these positions. But as opposed to Ice-T has worked hard to get to that position. That to me, as far as a piece of art, changes the context of how I look at it. It almost is more of a respect symbol for me. And I respect Ice-T more for where he's come from and the fact that he's earned that spot on the throne, as opposed to Napoleon demanding that spot on the throne or being, just being passed to that spot on the throne. It comes with a certain sense of arrogance. Now, that's not saying that people who are working, that anyone can be arrogant, but it's just this attitude. I loved what Kaylin said. She said the king of hip hop, but also the king of his own life. That it's just this larger than life presence. The pose, the way he's seated. It's just this ownership. It's this I don't care. This is what I'm presenting myself to be. Cassidy was talking about, what I took from Cassidy's comment was that realistic versus symbolic. Some of you who've had art history or history classes, some people were looking at the image in terms of the realistic realness of what they're looking at. Other people were referencing things from historical symbology things. So when you see the color red, when you saw, I think someone said an eagle or a staff or something. So Cassidy was looking at the symbology of that, which I think, it's more underlying meaning placing into that image. I just think that's really cool. Jeremy was talking about the center of the image, how Napoleon was in the how Ice-T was in the very center, and that again proposes a statement. When you think of a statue or a lot of portraits of people in history, it's dead center on, okay? It's supposed to mimic like a photograph. It's supposed to command your presence. He also mentioned that his hand looks like a priest, maybe. And I tied that to propaganda. You've got propaganda in Napoleon's time. You have propaganda in Ice-T's time. And what's interesting is, as far as back in the day, a lot of these religious paintings and paintings of kings and all that stuff were presentations of power. Paintings weren't cheap. So that in itself reflected rich wealth. People who were poor weren't taught to read. So a lot of these religious images or pictures were teaching the lower class society about social standards, social norms, and social rules. So when he said the priest hand, I thought that was interesting because this was meant to be some sort of statement. Whether you saw the old image or the new image, whether you knew Ice-T or you didn't, it was some sort of statement. Excuse me. Brenda, I'm just going to read her quote. She put, I think it is a funny thing about this class, though. We all have different viewpoints and interpretations about this work, and it all depends on what we know about it, in this instant, who Ice-T is. I agree 100%. Your different viewpoint, your recognition is all going to matter how you read this image. That is your power as a viewer. That is, to me personally, one of the most impactful, empowering things about art, is that you bring in your interpretation to that. And that, to me, is also correlates with your power as a teacher. You know, the worst, we've all had experiences with people where teachers are, you can 100% tell they don't know what they're talking about. But in your mind, you may have a reference to the experience. And so it's like, you know, my opinion is be honest if you're unsure and get opinions or ask, you know. Obviously, in art, the sharing of that is very different as opposed to in math or social studies where it's more a factual-based thing. But you can still mix in different types of conversation to add in those opinions, references, viewpoints. Alexis wrote that he looked confident and cocky. So I want to just propose the question in your head, are those two things different? Does someone have to be cocky in order for them to be confident? In my personal experience, the answer is no. You don't have to have both of those things. But a lot of the times with people in powerful positions, they have, you know, they hold both of those things, or they play both of those cards. So, you know, to me, cockiness at times is related to arrogance. And it's like this air about them. To me, the Napoleon image looks more cocky and arrogant, but the Ice-T image looks more confident. So I think that's interesting, the juxtaposition of the feeling of that. One thing I want to mention, Abby Hicks, her very first thing out of the gate was, I struggle with this assignment, as simple and silly as it may sound. Please, Abby, I loved your honesty here. Guys, this is not meant, you're not meant to know how to read all of these things. That's why you're taking this class. So if you want to voice about something that you don't know, that's what school is for. That's what questioning is for. I'm not even going to say that's what school is for. You are a life learner. If you are in any route to be seamed into education, then you're going to be a person who loves to learn. And you're going to constantly be learning. So to be upfront about that, I think is great. And to just struggle through an assignment means you're learning. It means you're pushing yourself. And, don't be afraid of that. Like, don't be discouraged if you feel like you're struggling through something as simple, or if you are reading this, or if you see, whether it's art making, art discussions, or whatever, just be yourselves and write what you know, and write your knowledge of the things that you know. And that's why you're here, is to learn new things. So on that note, don't be afraid to disagree with something. A lot of your responses when you had to reply to a classmate was in an agreement of what they were saying, like, oh, I love that, blah, blah, blah. But don't be afraid to disagree in a respectful way. That is what I hope that you also learned from this class, is that art is subjective. So what's even more interesting is the way you view art, where you see art, the day you see art. You might be in a bad mood and you may look at a piece of art and you just have a bad attitude. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's why we relook at things, especially as artists. We're constantly relooking things because we are constantly changing as human beings. So to relate that to your students, same thing. You may tell them one thing on a Tuesday and they're looking at you like blank stares and blank faces, but then you may tell them the exact same thing that following Tuesday, and it's like, bingo, light turns on. So don't be afraid to struggle. Don't be afraid to disagree with something. And obviously just be respectful. I have a motto in my life: nobody likes an asshole. Don't be rude, but just, you can say, I didn't see it that way. I don't agree with that, or whatever. And that's where you learn to tolerate. More tolerance comes in, is when you feel validated with what you're saying, but then you're respectfully saying that, or respectfully telling that person, that's an interesting thing. I didn't see it that way, or I have a different experience, or, whatever. So that's week 2 commentary. And I'm going to now do a week 3 commentary. And if you have anything else to add to this conversation, you can email me or put it in the, sorry, my brain's not working. The questions for instructors or whatever. So good job on those, and keep working hard.